It was supposed to be a fun camping trip, just me and my friends, deep in the heart of the forest, the kind of place where the trees seem to whisper secrets and the stars shine brighter than any city light. We set up our camp near a small serene lake, the water as still as glass. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire sharing stories and laughs. But as the fire dwindled to embers, a strange unease settled over us. The forest, once filled with the comforting sounds of nature, grew eerily silent. We joked about it, trying to keep the mood light, but I could see the worry in their eyes. That's when we heard it, a faint rustling sound, like footsteps, but not quite. It seemed to circle our camp, just beyond the reach of the firelight. We strained our eyes into the darkness, but saw nothing. The sound grew closer, more distinct, yet still nothing appeared. Panic began to set in. Without warning, our friend Mark, who had wandered a bit away from the camp, let out a blood-curdling scream. We rushed towards him, but by the time we got there, he was gone, vanished without a trace. Our shouts for him went unanswered, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the forest. We decided to stick together, huddled near the dying fire, jumping at every snap of a twig. Hours passed, the darkness around us thickening. Then another sound broke the silence. A low guttural growl, coming from all around us. We were not alone in these woods. As dawn approached, the growls grew louder, more aggressive. We could see shadows moving between the trees, circling us like predators. We knew we had to make a run for it to find help, to escape whatever was out there. With the first day of light, we sprinted through the forest, the sounds of our pursuers close behind. Branches whipped at our faces, roots tripped our feet, but fear propelled us forward. We didn't stop, not even when we heard the screams of another friend being pulled into the darkness. By some miracle, we stumbled out the woods into the safety of a nearby road. But of our group of 5, only 2 of us made it. The others were never found, and the police never believed our story. They said it was a bear attack, but I know what I heard, what I saw in those fleeting moments. Something was out there with us, something deadly, something that wasn't just an animal. The forest keeps its secrets, and we were lucky to escape with our lives. But sometimes late at night, I still hear those growls, feel those eyes watching me, and I know the horror is far from over. I had ventured into the dense forest of Black Pine Ridge for a weekend of solitude and hunting, a chance to reconnect with nature and sharpen my tracking skills. The forest was a sprawling canvas of green, untouched by the modern world, its silence a welcome of reprieve from the city's chaos. On the first evening, I set up camp in a small clearing, the ground blanketed by pine needles. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and pine. As I sat by the fire cooking a modest dinner, I reveled in the solitude. But as the shadows grew longer, a prickling sensation crawled up my spine. I chalked it up to the chill in the air and retired to my tent. That night, I awoke to the sound of footsteps outside. Gripping my hunting knife, I listened intently. The footsteps were measured, deliberate. I unzipped the tent, expecting to confront a curious animal, but the clearing was empty. The moon bathed the forest in a ghostly glow, and yet I still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The following day, I set out at dawn, determined to bag a deer. As I tracked through the woods, I couldn't ignore the sense of unease that clung to me like a second skin. Occasionally, I caught a glimpse of a figure in my periphery of vision. But when I turned to look, there was nothing but the dense thicket of trees. Hours passed, and the sense of being followed intensified. Every snapped twig or rustled leaf sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through me. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching me, toying with me. As the sun began to set, I decided to return to camp. The day's hunt forgotten. The feeling of dread grew with each step, the forest now a labyrinth closing in on me. When I finally reached the clearing, my breath caught in my throat. My tent was torn, the fabric slashed with precision. My supplies were scattered, a clear message rather than a search for food. And there on the ground was a single unmistakable footprint. It was large, human, but too heavy, too deliberate. That night, the footsteps returned, circling my camp, the intruder just beyond the firelight's reach. I called out, challenging the stalker, demanding an explanation. But only silence answered, a silence that mocked my fear. Dawn couldn't come soon enough, and with the first light, I packed what remained of my gear and left the cursed forest of Black Pine Ridge. I didn't stop, not until the trees were a distant memory. They say the forest is a place of peace, of solace, but I know better. I was the hunter, but in those twisted woods, under the gaze of an unseen stalker, I became the hunted. And though I escaped with my life, the feeling of being watched, of being prey, has never left me. It's a shadow that lingers, a reminder of the unknown man who stalked the depths of Black Pine Ridge. As an experienced mountaineer, I was no stranger to the perils and isolation of the snow-clad peaks. That winter, I set out to conquer the solitary heights of Mount Housian, a formidable challenge even for the seasoned. Its slopes were steep, its valleys deep, and its blizzards the stuff of legends. But the mountain's isolation drew me, promising a pure communion with nature, away from the world's relentless pace. The ascent began under a sky of unblemished blue, the sun reflecting off the snow in blinding arcs of light. I made my way up the slopes, my breathing forming clouds of vapor in the frigid air. The only sounds were the crunch of snow under my boots and the distant call of a raven echoing against the mountainside. As evening approached, I set up camp in a sheltered alcove, the mountains bulk shielding me from the biting wind. The tranquility was surreal, the sense of solitude absolute. As the darkness deepened, I gazed at the stars, their cold light distant and untouchable. But the peace of the night was short-lived. As I nestled into my sleeping bag, a sense of unease crept over me. It was an instinct, a primal warning that I wasn't alone. I convinced myself it was just the mountain playing tricks on me, its solitude breeding phantoms in my mind. At dawn, I was awakened by a sound, unmistakable and close, the crunch of snow. I emerged from my tent, expecting to confront a curious animal, perhaps a fox or a stray mountain goat. But the sight that met my eyes sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. There, not a dozen yards from my tent, were tracks in the snow. But these were no animals, they were boot prints, large and deep, leading up the mountain. The realization that someone else was out there in the vast, desolate expanse was unnerving. I followed the tracks, my curiosity piqued and my apprehension growing. They led up the mountain through narrow passes and perilous ledges. Whoever this person was, they were experienced, moving through the terrain with a purpose that seemed almost inhuman. For hours, I followed until the tracks abruptly stopped at the edge of a sheer cliff. It was impossible. No one could have descended it without equipment, and there was no sign of a return journey. It was as if the person had vanished into thin air. Bewildered and uneasy, I returned to my camp. That day, a storm rolled in, the wind howling like a banshee as the snow fell in blinding sheets. I was trapped, my thoughts consumed by the mysterious tracks and their impossible disappearance. When the storm abated days later, I descended the mountain, the mystery unresolved. The tracks were gone, erased by the storm as if they'd never been. Back in civilization, I inquired about other climbers, but none had been on the mountain during that time. To this day, the memory of those tracks haunts me. In the stillness of the night, I find myself listening for the crunch of snow, for the signs of the icebound watcher, and I wonder if on the solitary slopes of Mount Housian there walks a watcher, a guardian of the heights, leaving only tracks in the snow as a testament to their silent vigil. I had ventured into the heart of Redwood National Park, seeking the solace only nature could provide. My plan was simple, a weekend of camping, hiking, in the serenity of the ancient forest. The towering redwoods silent witnesses to centuries stood like sentinels around my chosen campsite, their majesty a balm to my weary soul. The first day passed in blissful tranquility. I hiked through the dense underbrush, the light filtering through the canopy in golden beams. As night fell, I built a fire, the flames casting a warm, reassuring glow against the gathering darkness. But as the fire crackled and popped, an unease began to settle over me. It was the feeling of being watched, the sensation of unseen eyes fixed upon my every move. I told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on me, the forest silence feeding my imagination. I retreated to my tent, seeking the refuge of sleep. But just as I began to drift off, a sound shattered the silence, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. I froze, listening intently. The footsteps were deliberate, measured, coming closer with each passing step. Summoning my courage, I peeked out the tent. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting faint flickering shadows among the trees. And then I saw him, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. He was tall, his features obscured by the darkness, but there was no mistaking the intent in his stance, the ominous aura that surrounded him. I retreated into the tent, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps continued circling the campsite, a predator stalking its prey. I clutched my knife, the only weapon I had, and braced myself. Without warning, the footsteps stopped. Silence descended, a suffocating heavy silence. Minutes stretched into eternity, my every breath a thunderous echo in the quiet. And then, a voice barely above a whisper broke the stillness. "You shouldn't be here," it hissed, a statement laced with menace. The fabric of the tent shuddered as a blade sliced through it, creating a tear in the material. I lashed out with my knife, a desperate swing in the dark. A grunt, the sound of pain, and then the figure retreated, disappearing into the forest as quickly as he had appeared. I emerged from the tent, my whole body trembling. The forest around me was still, the threat gone but the terror lingering. With no cell service and miles from the nearest ranger station, I knew I had to leave, to escape the woods that had turned from refuge to nightmare. The hike back was a blur of fear and adrenaline. Every shadow seemed to move, every noise a signal of his return. When I finally reached my car, the relief was overwhelming, but it was a relief tinged with horror. The police said it was a drifter, a man lost to sanity, living in the depths of the forest. They never found him, but the ranger's parting words stay with me to this day. "The woods have eyes," he said, a warning that some places, some terrors are beyond our understanding. Now I stick to the well-trodden paths, the safety of the crowd. But sometimes in the stillness of the night, I hear footsteps on dry leaves and I remember the Redwood reckoning. The night of the forest silence was the prelude to terror.